Hi, I am Isabel Escobar, professor at the University of Kentucky. The Meet the Leaders session was developed by the meeting program chair, Jennifer Curtis, and the co-meeting program chair, Jamie Hestikin and I. First, before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting would have physically occurred on the unceded ancestral homeland of the AvenueE Ohlone, who are the original peoples of San Francisco Peninsula, and we affirm their rights as First People. We have the pleasure to introduce this Meet the Leaders session. This plenary session will focus on ongoing success stories in the area of diversity and inclusion, as well as it will address some still unmet needs in both academia and industry. The session features a moderated panel of executives from industry and senior academic administrators who have all been personally involved with one successful major effort regarding diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice. The panelists are Jenny Lopez Reed, Chief Operating Officer, Eli Lilly and Company; Gary May, Chancellor, University of California, Davis; Lori Ryerkirk, Chief Executive Officer, Celanese Corporation; and the moderator is Christine Grant, Associate Dean, North Carolina State University, and President-elect of the AIChE.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad that you're here today to join us in this very special panel that we're having. My name is Christine Grant, and as Isabel said, I am a professor of chemical and biomolecular engineering at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina. I am also the president-elect. It was just announced. I will become president-elect in January of 2021, so I'm really excited. I've been with the Academy at North Carolina State University for about 31 years, going on 31 years. Did research, moved from assistant to associate to full professor, and have been very active in AIChE. So we're really excited today. When I was asked to moderate this panel, I thought, oh my goodness, what an amazing group of people that we have that are going to be working with us. So what we're going to do is we met before, and we actually have developed some questions for them. And it's the same question, but it's tweaked just a little bit to be specific to the industry that they're working with, or the institution that they're working with, in the case of those in academia. So I'm going to start by asking Jennifer Lopez Ryan. Is she?
Hello, hola.
Hello. Okay, can I see you? I don't know if I can see you. Oh, there you are. Okay, there she is. So as you heard, she is working at Eli Lilly. And what I'm going to do for each question is I'm going to ask the person to give us a little bit of a background on who they are and where they've come from in their journey, and then ask a specific question. So for Jennifer, her question is, can you discuss your strategies for navigating your empowerment in your transition from a student in Puerto Rico to graduate school to a corporate environment? And that's a really interesting journey. And some of our participants and folks watching may be interested in that. So Jennifer, we'd love to hear your views on this.
Of course. Thank you very much, Christine. Hola, everybody. My name is Jenny Lopez Reed, and I am originally from Puerto Rico. That's why you see the background. And I moved to the United States in 2000 to do my master's in chemical engineering. And ever since, I've been working with the company Eli Lilly and Company. And most of my career had been in manufacturing and quality, but most recently I transitioned to the business side. So I am a senior advisor and a chief operating officer for the diabetes business unit. I wish I can stay here and say, hey, I had a really smooth transition and this is a strategy to follow. But the reality is that it was not an easy transition. So instead, what I want to do is that I want to share a little bit about my story and how I use some of those learnings to really fuel my career. And then also share a little bit of actions of what everybody can do. So this way, the future generations can have a little bit more successful and smooth transitions in the future. The reality is that if you're a member of a minority member, when you come here to the United States, you really quickly see that there's nobody that looks like you or act like you. And what you start doing is that you start changing who you are so you can fit in and have a chance of a career that is successful. And that's where the problem starts. So I can go back to whenever I was first in the introductions in grad school. And after my introduction, I had a classmate who said, University of Puerto Rico, ha, is that even a real university? Then after I got hired at my company, I had one of the interviewers who said, oh, Jenny, I'm so glad I see you. We almost didn't hire you because you were too bubbly for an engineer, which I'm like, why did he feel the need to share that with me? My very first performance review, the only thing that I needed to change was that I needed to dress more like an engineer, which to this point, I still don't know what he meant, because there were two ladies in that group. We were on the manufacturing floor the whole time, and I was already working really hard to fit in and not to stand out. My very first promotion, I had a senior scientist who called me and said, hey, I want to give you a piece of feedback. Make sure that you're very careful about your first impressions because you don't look smart. So whenever you get that kind of feedback on and on and on, Jenny, you use your hands too much. You are too energetic. Tone it down. Don't let your Latina out. You empower your employees too much, which I say thank you because I thought it was a compliment, but I quickly realized it was not. So around year 5 to 6 of my career, I really sat back and started very carefully to see how did I dress? How did I come out? Like, what did I say? And honestly, I got lost. I lost my charm because I was putting all my energy in trying to be somebody who I was not. So I quickly snapped out of it and I say, no, Jenny, you cannot do that because if you look back, the reason you're successful is because of those differences. So those are the things that make you bring a different dimension on engineering, on leadership. And that's really what connected with people. So what I did is that from now on, I'm going to live with my authentic self. And I just want to focus on how I can best help my people. How can I best help my organization? And once you focus all of that energy into that, the results are really loud and clear. And the second reason I did that is because I wanted to be a role model for the one that I didn't have when I first started in the industry. I wanted everybody to say it's really needed for you to bring your authentic self to work every day. For you to understand that you can be a female, you can be a Latina, and you can still have a very successful and rewarding career. And that really was the fuel for my career. So if I look back and look at younger Jenny, I will say, make sure that the only thing you focus is how can you be the best you, and you give the best value you can have, and let that be your North Star, your guiding principle. When people ask me, what can I do, Jenny, to help? Because sometimes people think about the diversity and inclusion like a taboo thing. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to offend anybody. And I say, just care. I'm telling you, one of the most impactful people in my life was my professor and senior advisor in grad school. And I really, really hope that he's joining, because if you're here, Professor Nicolas Pepas, I want to, like, from the bottom of my heart, say thank you. Because he always embraced me for who I was. He treated me like family. He gave me that confidence that I was lacking because, again, I felt different. And you have no idea how, like, a little impact, like little action, the impact you can have. So just care. To this point, I don't even know how he does it. He keeps a pulse on all of us and always celebrates our successes, promotions, or achievements. Before social media, I was through handwritten notes. And now in Facebook. So thank you, thank you, thank you. It takes people like him everywhere to really embrace all of the differences that we bring to the table. And then if you're in your organization, look, I mean, how diverse is my team? Is it diverse? Yes or no? And understand why. Right. Because then those are the root causes. Do I have biases? Do I have processes that I need to change? And really make an impact. Just care, ask for story, be a mentor, be a sponsor. Little action, huge impact. Thank you for the question.
Wow, that was powerful. Thank you, Jennifer. It's funny because when you start mentoring people, I remember Nick Pepas pulling me off to the side at AIChE meetings and giving me little tidbits of advice. So, wow, that was really powerful. It's interesting about bringing your authentic self. So what I heard was bring your authentic self, bring your best, and let that be your North Star. That sounds like a tweet. And just being authentic and being an authentic relationship. So we're going to move on to Gary May. Gary has gone through all the stages of being a faculty member, being a graduate student, a faculty member. I first met Gary when I was a new grad student at Georgia Tech. So we go way, way, way back. He was an undergrad, getting ready to go to graduate school. So I'm going to ask Gary, as a university chancellor, What does a university chancellor focus on to move forward in the diversity, equity, and inclusion realm, or developing a culture of inclusion? There's so many different terms that people use for this work, depending on where you are in your institution. So Gary, give us a little bit of information about who you are, your background, and then answer the question.
Well, thanks, Christine. First, let me just say it's a pleasure to be here with you and with AICHE. I am not only the token male on the panel, I am the only non-chemical engineer on the panel. I'm an electrical engineer by training. Got my degrees at Georgia Tech, undergrad, and my PhD at UC Berkeley. Spent 26 years on the faculty and the administration at Georgia Tech, most recently as Dean of that College of Engineering. And then I came to UC Davis in 2017 to become the Chancellor, the 7th Chancellor of our university. So it's a pleasure to be here again and to talk about our efforts at UC Davis in diversity, equity, and inclusion. California is one of the most diverse states in the nation. Our student body, our faculty, and our staff should therefore and must reflect and serve our state's rich cultural, racial, geographic, and socioeconomic diversity. But we have a lot of work to do here. We see that when we look at the faculty representation throughout the UC system and our 10 campuses. Nearly 67% of the faculty across the system are white and 65% are male. And if you compare that to the student pipeline in California, it's somewhat jarring because more than half of the students attending California's K through 12 public schools are Latinx. So there's a disconnect there. Underrepresentation in STEM has really been one of the most intractable problems in our country for many years. When I finished graduate school at Berkeley in 1991, I was one of only about 30 African Americans that year who earned a PhD in engineering. That's 30 in the entire United States, and you could fit us all in a single classroom. And as everyone on this panel knows, and everyone in the audience probably knows, women and minorities continue to be abysmally underrepresented in STEM fields. So I think academic leaders are in a unique position to bring access and opportunity and advancement in this area. So, how can we increase the pipeline of diverse talent in STEM? And I'll share a few thoughts in that area. First, as I say to my staff all the time, diversity is everyone's job. It requires commitment from the highest levels of an organization all the way down. And that commitment needs to last for the long haul. Now, UC Davis, one of our strategic plan goals is to be a role model of diversity and inclusion in higher ed. We have an Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and dedicated teams focused on inclusive excellence in recruiting and retaining the best and brightest students, faculty, and staff. Our College of Engineering has its own diversity and inclusion plan that's aligned with our campus goals. And their efforts were recently recognized by ASE's inaugural diversity recognition program. The college received the Bronze Award, the highest level of recognition for making significant progress in increasing diversity, inclusion, and degree attainment outcomes. Support from leadership is always crucial. So I want to applaud our Dean, Jennifer Curtis, Dean of the UC Davis College of Engineering, for her efforts in advancing diversity in STEM and for inviting me to participate today. Next, we also need targeted programs that are geared specifically for underrepresented students in STEM. And those programs need resources, and those resources need to be consistent. At UC Davis, we're expanding our network through partnerships with companies, nonprofits, and other higher ed institutions. One example is our Avenue to Engineering program, or AvenueE for short. It's a partnership with Chevron to help STEM students develop the skills necessary to succeed in their careers and to make progress from community colleges to the four-year campus here. We have another program sponsored by Chevron called Leadership in Engineering Advancement, Diversity, and Retention. As the name implies, the goal is to recruit, retain, and graduate a diverse group of engineering students. The program involves a number of other business partners, including AT&T, Boeing, Cisco, to name a few. We know that underemployment is an issue that disproportionately impacts first-generation college graduates and people of color. And this can have long-term negative impacts on career trajectories and earnings. So internships and focused programs can help to close that gap. Now, finally, we must help our underrepresented students and colleagues build community. Mentoring plays such a critical role for underrepresented students. It's also important for staff and faculty. One of my favorite quotes of all time on this topic comes from former U.S. Surgeon General Joycelyn Elders, who said simply, "You can't be what you can't see." Now, at UC Davis, incoming engineering students are offered the opportunity to have an alumni mentor. In its first year, our Mentor Collective program matched 288 alumni with 451 first-year and transfer students. And they logged nearly 2,500 conversations among them. There are a lot of reasons why one might argue that diversity in STEM is an imperative. There's certainly a social equity, closing the pay gap, and there's graduating enough STEM grads to meet projected workforce needs and be competitive. But I would put forward that there's a more practical argument. You know, diversity actually drives innovation and produces better outcomes for our increasingly global and diverse workforce. It's at the root of innovation and technical advancement. Without it, we see design flaws and innovations that omit women and people of color potentially. A couple of examples. The first airbags in the auto industry almost killed women passengers. Why? Because they were tested on crash test dummies that had male anatomies. We also find even today, some AI programs have racial and gender biases. Well, for example, a recent study found that people of color are more likely to be hit by driverless cars. Kind of scary, right? Driverless cars are better able to detect pedestrians with lighter skin than those of us that have a darker skin pigment. And these are just a couple of examples, but they make what I think is a clear point. Diversity as a practical matter leads to better outcomes. So diversity isn't just the right thing to do for social equity. It's what we must do to remain competitive, to create a globally robust and competitive economy. We need to create an inclusive future for STEM, and that means engaging people of all genders, colors, and backgrounds. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary, for those inspiring remarks. You heard mentoring again, right? So Gary talked about mentoring, Jennifer talked about mentoring. That's a really important component of this, but it's not the only component. So now we're going to move on to Lori. Lori is a corporate executive, and so she has a different perspective and a different journey. And so I'm going to ask you, Lori, if you could give us your bio and also answer the question, how do you create inclusive environments in corporate spaces, and how important is leadership? Gary talked about leadership and their role, and maybe you'll talk about leadership or some other elements. So Lori, we look forward to hearing from you.
Great, thank you very much, Christine. So again, my name is Lori Ryerkirk. I am a chemical engineering graduate from Iowa State University, graduated in 1983. After graduation, I went to the Baton Rouge, Louisiana refinery for Exxon as a process engineer. So I started in the field every day. Again, remember this is now 1984, so very young female graduate, one of very few at the time. I actually spent 24.5 years with Exxon. I worked in all aspects of oil and gas, Exxon and ExxonMobil. I had a wide range of positions. Ultimately, I ran a chemical plant in Baton Rouge. I ran a large refinery in Beaumont, Texas. I ran an electrical utility JV in Hong Kong. So I had the opportunity to live a wide variety of places, including outside of the US and travel outside of the US. I then went from Exxon to a smaller company for a couple of years, and then finally to Shell, where I spent 9 years, the last 5 years of those as the global head of manufacturing for Shell, meaning I ran all of the chemical plants and refineries for Shell around the globe. So I joined Celanese now as CEO in May of 2019. I also became chairman in April of this year in 2020. And we are a specialty chemical company with about 8,000 employees and operate in over 20 countries. So when we think about diversity, it's not just Black, white, Latino, it's not male, female. It is also diversity of country, diversity of background, diversity of thought. We like to phrase it in that way because we represent a global company, and we don't want to be a global an American company that happens to have global operations. We want to be a truly global company that happens to be based in the US. And so we try to reflect that. So our focus is really focused on diversity, equality, and inclusion. We are very vocal about it. We talk about it very openly in our company. But I would say it's not what we talk about that is important, but it's what we do. And I think it really has to start at the top in a corporation. So on my board, I added one more board member. So I now have a 50-50 male-female board. In my leadership team, 3 of the top 7 positions are held by women. I try to make sure I always have representation from Europe and from Asia, which are equally big in my world as the US. And I make sure I have all of my leadership having diversity from all different companies, as well as the makeup within those countries. Why? I mean, we market to businesses, but we want our workforce to have the benefit of diversity, and we want the work in terms of how we think, because our whole business is based on creativity and collaboration. And we get a lot more creativity and a lot more collaboration if everybody coming into the room comes from a different background, comes with a different set of beliefs, comes with a different set of ideas, comes with a different experience. It gives us a better solution. So how do we do that? Besides demonstrating at the top, you know, we insist every candidate slate be a diverse slate. We make sure we say, okay, who in the organization or outside of the organization could we consider for a job? We make sure our graduating classes we bring in, because we hire both experienced and new hires, that we always get a representation that looks like the communities that we're in and that we pull from for our jobs. One of the things that we focus on is something we call it respectful workplace. We actually went around and trained everybody on principles of a respectful workplace, right? How do you assume good intent? How do you make sure you're not inadvertently say something that others will find offensive? How do you talk to people if you find something offensive in a way that leads to a constructive dialogue, not a destructive dialogue? We have lunch and learn sessions on micro inequalities or micro inequities and get people to think about, because the truth is we all have biases. No matter, you know, even all of us as panelists, we all have some bias. You know, maybe it's not about the color of someone's skin, but maybe it's about someone's religion or, you know, something else. And we just all need to constantly be questioning, why am I reacting to a person this way? Is it a reasonable reaction? Or am I reacting to something, you know, that is beyond their control? We have employee research groups. So we have a Black employee research group, we have Latino, we have LGBTQ. That's an important part of our population. We have one for women, we have one for veterans. You know, and different countries also have different ones representing their unique populations, because again, it's not just a US problem. If you go to, you know, if you're a Turk working in Holland, you experience discrimination. If you're, you know, an Eastern European or somebody working in Germany, you experience discrimination. If you know, I had an employee after a recent session in Budapest say, we never realized, like, we really don't treat the Romana population, so I think Gypsy population, equally. We treat them as something else. And so having open dialogues about this all of the time really leads to discussions in the organization and understanding people know that we expect a certain type of behavior towards other. We can't change people's beliefs necessarily, but we expect them to demonstrate respect in the workplace. Quite frankly, we've gotten rid of leaders who didn't demonstrate that respect that we expected. So it is about walking the talk each and every day. One of the interesting recent projects we've done, which I think has been really effective, is we actually had, and it was actually suggested by an employee, but then we supported it. We actually had an employee come forward and say, hey, you know, the 1619 podcast that is out there is really moving and a great platform for dialogue. So we sponsored, we actually, I think, had about 12 or 15 the first round. You know, 10, 12 people in a conversation group, and they would listen to the podcast, and then they would get together once a week and talk about what they heard in the podcast, how they reacted emotionally to it. People would share their experience. We had people participate from Asia, from Europe, so it wasn't even just a US thing, but it was just another platform to promote dialogue amongst all employees of the organization, to try to understand a little bit more the world that we all live in, and that it looks a little bit different to each of us, but the more we talk about it, the more we can appreciate the differences. And we like to say in our company, it's not enough to tolerate the differences, but we need to embrace the differences and love each other for who we are, and make sure that everyone has the experience and the opportunity to bring their true self to work every single day.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those comments. So one of the questions that we came up with, and some of you have touched on this in your comments already, is how should DEI be incorporated into the workplace? So for example, the university, classroom, corporate, are there promising practices, actionable items that should be considered? And a number of you already have touched on those, but if there's something you haven't brought up that you'd like to highlight, or maybe something that impacted you along the course of your career. And I'll just let whoever jump in. I guess Jennifer will start with you.
I can jump in. Sorry, I'm still knowing how to do the slides correctly. And something Gary said that is really important is like that diversity, that's the way we do things. Like it's everybody's responsibility. And I really love the evolution, because when I first started, it was more like a nice thing to do, or a metric that we had to meet, or a training that we took once a year. And now there's a lot of data, a lot of research that a very diverse team from all levels is operating at a much higher performance. I mean, companies with diverse executive teams, they have 35% higher earnings, 2.3 higher cash flows, 70% more likely to jump in new markets and new opportunities way faster than the remaining of the companies. So they understand that this is an advantage to make sure, because you get all of these ideas integrated. And again, it's the best way to add the most value and be the most competitive. So my company, specifically Eli Lilly, realized that they needed to change the way they've done things in the past, because the future is going to look very different. And they have invested a lot in what we call like the employee journeys. And they have done similar, like very stratified, just to get data. They hire an outside consultant firm to do this, but the African-American journey, the Latinx journey, the LGBTQ, the women, and they identify what are the moments of truth. And they are very intentional with all of the specific things that they have to do for each of those segments, or the things that we need to do as an enterprise. So I'll give you an example. Our talent ID identification process had a huge bias, and we didn't know. We realized that we put all of our top talent through the process, and there's a huge gap on how the males were graded versus the females. Even leaders that reported to me, I'm like, they're both fantastic. Why is there such a huge gap? And then they looked at questions. There was an example of a question that said, would you sacrifice everything to get to higher levels in your organization? And the males were looking at that question like, of course, like I'm super dedicated and I want to accomplish my goals. This is my top priority. And the females were looking at it like, how dare you asking me that question? I love my family. Of course, I'm not going to sacrifice everything. I'm not saying that the males, they just look at the question differently. And because of that bias, they had that difference. So we completely revamped that process. And the other piece was our recruitment process. Now you have to have a diverse set of candidates. Otherwise, you cannot proceed with interviews. And you have to have also a diverse set of interviewers. And it takes a little bit longer, but in the past, it was, like Lori mentioned, like our normal bias, I go with the people I know, or like I go with the first couple of candidates who come up because I need to fill this position. But it takes a little bit more investment in time at the beginning, but the results are incredible. And because of changing that practice, our diversity numbers are much richer right now. I'm not saying that I will hire the diverse candidate automatically, no, but everybody has an even field and the best candidate gets the role. And those are two big things that we have changed that had dramatically changed for us in a good way.
Okay, great. So Gary or Lori?
I can go next. Let me just share a few things that we're doing here at UC Davis. First, we require all applicants for faculty positions to submit statements describing how they're going to contribute to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're all used to writing a research statement and teaching statement as faculty candidates. We're also requiring a diversity statement. Next, we're training the people involved in faculty recruitment and hiring. We've trained more than 1,300 faculty members on implicit bias and best practices for faculty recruitment. And this is a faculty-led training, not an administration-led training. And we call it STEAD. It's an acronym for Strength Through Equity and Diversity. We want to ensure that everyone who applies best practices for achieving excellence in equity and diversity in faculty recruitment. And on our health campus, where the medical school and the hospital are, we have something called SEED training. This is another acronym. SEED stands for Supporting Educational Excellence and Diversity. And this training teaches faculty and instructors how to apply cultural humility and how to identify microaggressions, which we heard about, that can impede learning. In 2012, we received an NSF Advanced Institutional Transformation Grant. We've had success institutionalizing the effective programs that were created from that grant. And one of those is the Center for the Advancement of Multicultural Perspectives on Science, or CAMPOS. So since 2012, we've successfully recruited 30 Campos scholars, faculty of color, who are promoting diversity in STEM through their research, teaching, or service to the university. The center is focused on expanding the ranks of women and underrepresented faculty. So we're creating opportunity in our faculty ranks. And this also has ripple effects because these scholars serve as role models and mentors to others in our campus community.
Okay, great. So Lori?
There we go. Yeah, look, I think I covered a lot of it. I would just stress, training is good, it's necessary. I think the proof is always in the actions, and I know Chancellor May would agree with that. And it's really about, for us as a corporation, holding each level of our leadership responsible for what they can personally do to support a more diverse and inclusive and equal environment. I mean, look, we look at all the metrics around pay metrics and all that, but at the end of the day, that's an afterthought. It's more about how do you really, how do I talk to every single one of my leaders every year in their performance review and say, great, these are the jobs. Now tell me about your leadership development. Tell me about your lines of succession. Tell me how those people, tell me about your minority and your female candidates and your non-traditional candidates. How are they being developed? What are you specifically doing to develop them to make sure they are in the pipeline? Maybe they're not next, maybe they're second, but let me at least know what you're doing, and holding people to account for making sure they are developing, giving everyone that opportunity to develop. And not everybody wants to develop in the same way. So this is not just about all of them developing as leaders, but saying, what are you really doing to help this person meet their aspirations, to make sure that we are spending the right amount of time on every one of our talents, not just the ones, as Jennifer pointed out, we're all more comfortable with people who probably are more our personality or look more like us or come from our background. But as leaders, we have to extend that to everyone, not to make them like us, but to appreciate why they're different and really help them grow in the company within those differences.
Okay, great. Well, we've got some questions in there. I want to thank you all for your comments, and we've got some time. I'm going to pick a couple in no particular order, and you don't all have to answer them. One of our participants says, what are some strategies to constructively handle employee non-compliance with diversity efforts? So if we're honest with ourselves, we know that not everybody is on board, so to speak, right? Not everybody has the same perspective as what we're talking about. So what are some strategies that you use to constructively handle employees' non-compliance with diversity efforts of your organizations?
Lori, I think Lori mentioned something that I really liked, because we've done the same thing. There are people who were leaders before and they're not leaders now because they're not on board with how you're supposed to do business. And it's the same thing that we've done in our company. As a leader, you're expected to, you have to, it's in the DNA. That's how you do business. That's how you have to operate. And if you're not on board, then consequences will happen. It's part of your performance review.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, same here. I started as a dean. I started putting this question in people's annual performance reviews. What have you done to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion on the campus? And it affects the review that you get and the salary increase or not that you get, and all sorts of things.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So
can I add one thing on that, Christine? So look, I think you also need to try to understand, why is that person or that group of person resistive to it? So I'm just going to give you an example. So this was a couple years ago, even before I was in place, but we still have similar conversations today. When the bathroom bill came out in Texas, which was going to ban transgender from bathrooms, as a company, we came out against it and said, that's not right. That's not, the transgender community as well needs to have the right opportunities. And this is sending the wrong message about what we believe in. And quite frankly, we had some groups of employees that were highly religious who didn't agree with the company's position on this. And frankly, the company sat down and had conversations and said, hey, we get that you have a belief that it's hard for you to agree, but these are your coworkers. These are your friends. Maybe they're not at your site, but you talk to these people on the phone. You know these people. Why would you want to make them feel less capable or less able or in a position where they feel uncomfortable in their world? And when you make the problem personal, when you say, they go, well, you're right, I like Bob or I like Sally, then they have a hard time hanging on to that. Now, I'm not going to change their religious beliefs. That's not my intent. But by making it personal and say, hey, this is about just being respectful to your coworkers, who you like. you know, you may not, there may be some element you don't understand, but you like them. Making it personal, encouraging those dialogues to happen, we have found is a good way to help people get through maybe some biases they have because of their backgrounds or whatever.
Okay, thank you. So this one is a question, I think it's kind of quick. I think it's referring to something that you said, Jennifer. Being yourself, in quotes, is great, but how do you measure being yourself? Have you had any experience with tools such as Myers-Briggs, Kirtan, KIAI, etc.? So any thoughts on that? Or how do you evaluate kind of your authentic self, maybe? Or there's all kinds of things that are out there, but do you all?
The way I'm talking to you today is the way I talk to my daughter, to my husband, to my mom, and to my employee and to my supervisor. I am the way who I am at all times. There's not like a professional Jenny and a mom Jenny. This is me. And the reason I am very intentional with that is because, again, I want to be a role model, other people to do the same. It is so freeing. If you get all your energy trying to pretend to somebody who you're not, you're only operating maybe at a 50%. Because you're wasting all that energy in something that honestly is not valued. And always think about the other people who are watching you, right? If they see you doing it, now they're say, oh, hey, you know, then it's okay for me to be myself, and then it just creates momentum that way. So again, this is just me.
So Lori or Gary, anything about those tools that people can use to find out more about themselves?
Well, I'll just say, piggybacking on what Jenny said, I always say I'm going to be myself because that's the only person I'm any good at being. So, but in terms of the tools, those can be useful. I think I'm an ISTJ from Myers-Briggs. If anybody remembers their Myers-Briggs, many engineers fit in that category. But they're only tools. They're only as good as what you use them for. So you have to kind of be smart about how you use such tools, and don't be too restrictive with what they mean.
Yeah, Lori.
Yeah, I agree with both Jenny and Gary. I think, look, the tool actually I find more useful in understanding maybe why other people respond in the way they do, because you say, oh, they're an E or they're an I, and then you go, now I understand them a bit better. But I think Jenny has it. If you don't feel like you can express yourself in the same way you would with friends and family at work, then you probably aren't getting to be your authentic self.
Yeah, I want to add to that. I think that it changes over time. It can change over time, depending on the status of where you are in the profession and how comfortable you feel in your skin, so to speak. So, for example, early on in my career, you probably would not see me wearing pink, nor would you see me with natural hair. And I think that was, well, I know that was a transition that I made as I felt more comfortable with myself. That was personal. I'm not saying that people should not wear natural hair, or they should not wear pink, or they should wear pink. I'm just saying that for myself, it was something that I had to understand and embrace, because I was the first African-American woman professor in the College of Engineering at NC State, and the only one for 16 years. So, nobody looked like me who was in my same rank. So that was something that I worked through, and I think that I want to give our viewers an opportunity to understand that you can work through those things too. I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. And of course, we're talking in hindsight here as well. So it's definitely been a journey. So let me get another question in. What ways have you seen to actually measure effectiveness of various programs that aim to grow diverse employees into higher levels of leadership? Sometimes there's a disconnect between well-intentioned efforts and results. Example, let's do seminars on building confidence for women, but then not having any idea if it helped, or we just wasted our time. So I'm going to expand that question and say something about, sometimes it's about fixing the woman, and sometimes it's about fixing the system. So these are two opposite ways. And I'm not saying we should be fixing the women or fixing the system. I'm just saying there are two ways. And I think that there has to be a way to bring to the table this idea of providing training and introduction for folks, and the system needs to be ready to receive them. But I want to hear what you all think. Let me start with Lori.
Yeah, so look, I think the clue is you have to make everything available to everyone. So although we have employee resource groups, aimed at certain groups of people, women, Blacks, Latinos, et cetera, they're open to everyone. And so interesting enough, a lot of our employee resource groups will have public speaking training or different other things, but other people come and join because they're good programs and they offer them. And that itself is a way of promoting, you know, better dialogue. So I'm definitely a believer, because I've been on the somebody wanting to fix me end of the system in my career. I am all about fixing the system, because, you know, it is generally, it's not the women, the Blacks, the Latinos, the LGBTQ. They are not the problem. The problem is the system in which they're working in. And, you know, for those of you who are engineers, you should understand that, because the same is true about safety and reliability and everything else. I mean, it's always about the system. And so the focus needs to be on fixing the system. And I think that's around inclusion, making all, so when we do respectful workplace training, everybody goes through it. It's not just certain groups that go through it. Everybody goes through it. And it is trying to improve the system. And I would say, you know, the number one thing we tell people is, look, assume good intent. We're all going to say something stupid, do something stupid at some point in our lives, but assume good intent and have a conversation if someone has done something that you found offensive. And we found that alone is a lot towards fixing the system and just making people conscious of the environment that they're in.
So I have about 12 questions in the queue, and we don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to just quickly go through these, and whoever wants to jump in, go ahead. As graduate students or employees, what are the key ways we can push professors or management we work with to adopt more aspects of DEI into courses, even though it may mean additional work for them? What are your recommendations on strategy here? I'm going to throw that one to Gary. I'm putting him on the spot.
Well, I'm going to say something first that I get it. I was a graduate student, but I think the most impactful thing you can do as a graduate student is to graduate, right? And then you can get a faculty job yourself and have the kind of impact that you really want to have. But in the meantime, I know that that's too far out for the person who asked the question. In the meantime, I think you have to look for allies on the campus and in the campus administration and the leadership. And I think you need to be able to show how such activity makes the university a better place, not just a feel-good better, but a quantitatively measurable better. Better research outcomes, as I mentioned before, more funding, more citations, more publications, et cetera. Because I think there are some studies that have shown that how this impact does really take place. So, but I think my first comment holds: graduate, get your degree, become a professor yourself, and then, you know, don't rock the boat, take the oars.
Okay, here's another one. In which ways is your company, university, organization welcoming communities with special needs? That's a good question. We're talking about all different types of diversity. And they didn't define what they meant by special needs, but you can interpret that. And
yeah, I mean, I can go again. We have a diversity strategic plan that has metrics and milestones associated with making the campus a welcoming place for all. So I'm not sure what the questioner means by special needs either. It could mean physical disabilities as well as other needs. But we try to accommodate all of those people from with all those backgrounds.
Okay, I'm going to an earlier question. What is your advice on metrics that universities and companies should be using to measure progress and set goals? I've seen some examples of wanting to match the demographics of either the nation, state, or city in which they live. I'm wondering if those are reasonable, feasible targets, or if there are better ones. We could probably spend 15 minutes on that, but who wants to jump in and take that one?
I'll take that one, Christine. So look, when we look at, say, our engineering population, we try to match the demographics of engineering graduates for that country that we're in. When we try to do it for, say, operators and craftsmen, we try to match the demographics for the available workplace in, like, a 50-mile radius for that physical facility. So I think actually trying to do it based on very specifically the workforce that it's reasonable to expect to be pulling from is much more satisfactory than, looking at, the universe and saying, well, it should be 50-50. Now, interesting enough, often for women, men, it is 50-50, although you have to, in some skills like operators, craftsmen, it's really, really hard to get to that stretch. Engineers, unfortunately, that means 30%. But then we expect those demographics to continue as we look at our leadership. So, you know, if the leadership is coming out of an engineering pool and the demographic is 30% of the graduates, take the US, and, you know, and are female, then we expect to have at least female at that percentage as we go up the company.
Okay.
I don't know a better way to do it. I mean, I've seen people try to set much more aggressive targets, but I think trying to match the reasonable population you can pull from is a good one.
Yeah.
Jennifer,
I would like to add something super quick. Also thinking about what's going to be the composition, right, in the future. So if you think about, I'm talking about Latinx for now, by 2050, we're going to be a third of the United States. And honestly, to be honest with you, corporate America is not ready for it. So now is the time to start putting those aggressive targets and see what needs to change for us to be able to be prepared for the future.
Okay, so Jennifer, are you looking at the question and answer as well? Are you looking at it? I don't know if you can see it. No? Okay. Anyway, I was going to ask you to answer one. Okay, so any suggestions for engaging a person in power, professor, supervisor, manager, in a conversation in diversity and inclusion? It's kind of open-ended, but just engaging a person in power. So, you know, there are power differentials that occur a lot, of course, right? There are hierarchies that are there. So how do you engage with them?
You know, when I was not the person in power, I would just send an email or a memo, or, you know, ask for an appointment. I was pretty assertive with that. I think you might be pleasantly surprised to find that the people in power are willing to have these conversations with you at a certain level. So I would say be assertive and make the first move, reach out.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would follow that up with, you know, come with a suggestion or an idea. I mean, certainly when I had an employee who said, hey, these 1619 podcasts are super interesting, don't you think it'd be great to sponsor some, you know, discussion circles? We're like, wow, what a great idea. Well, this was not a senior leader in the company that came with this. This is, you know, kind of a first level supervisor, but what a great idea. And so, you know, you really can assume if you come with a suggestion for a good idea. So if you come with a lot of complaints, people get tired of that pretty quickly. But if you come with a suggestion of something that can be done to help, people will grab it. We're all trying to figure out how to make this journey go faster and smoother and with better end results.
And I would add to that we want all of your employees to stay where they are, all your students to graduate from where they are. But I would offer you the point that sometimes it's not always a fit. So if you are in a situation or organization that is not aligning and it's causing you to be up at night, right? You're losing sleep and losing hair and losing, you know, I think sometimes it's good to evaluate where you are and if this is the right fit for a number of reasons, right? Because we want you to be happy along your career and successful and productive and a contributing member of the organization, right? Okay, so the other question is, what is the best way to gauge progress in this front? What does success look like?
Well, I think there are quantitative measures, and Lori talked about some of them. I think you can count noses of different types, right? And figure out where you are with respect to populations. Parity is a good goal, right? In that sense, parity with respect to the pool or parity with respect to the overall population. You can set different goals, but there are also some qualitative things you can do. You can do climate studies. You want to make sure that people not only are present, but they feel empowered and they feel welcomed and they feel like they can progress and be successful in your organization. So often, you know, climate studies of various types can be helpful in you identifying how to make that happen.
Okay, thanks. How about this is a good one for Lori. How can you share your views on strategies for foreigners to kickstart a career in another country? Since you talked about the fact that you worked in different places, maybe other people can weigh in too, but I was thinking, Lori, because you were very intentional in your remarks about that.
Yeah, look, most of our folks start in their home country and then you know, move around the company as needed. It's a lot easier to get hired in your home country. Now, like if you're a foreign student in the US, you can definitely interview in the US. And if you're willing to start in your home country, that's easy. But we do start international students in the US. I think it's just, you need to be really clear going through the interview process what you want. And unfortunately, you know, it has been harder in the last few years to get visa approvals for non-US graduates. So, you know, I would just say be really intentional. Look at the, you know, you will have more luck if you find a country that exists in your home country as well as the US if you're trying to stay in the US or go somewhere else. If they're in both places, it is a lot easier for the country, quite frankly, to get the necessary work visas on training basis and everything else that you're looking for. And you got to be willing to sell yourself. Tell, you know, you got to have your story about why should a company hire you and the extra expense and all that. What will you bring that makes you attractive as someone from one country working in the US or vice versa?
So thank you. So I'm going to ask Lori a follow-up question. There is talk about race, religion, etc. bias, but what about age bias? How does it exist and how do we get around it? I mean, there's age, that could be anywhere, but I'm specifically asking Lori this question about age bias. How do you manage that? You've got a young engineer that comes in early career, you have a senior engineer, and there's some issues with positions and jockeying for position. And, you know, how do you deal with age bias? Do you see that in corporate?
Yeah, I mean, look, it definitely exists. I think probably the age bias more exists for older employees that at a certain point, people assume they don't want to move or they don't want the opportunity, or, well, we're not going to change their job because they're just going to retire anyway at 55. So I actually think it's a bigger, you look, young up and coming engineers who show, you know, real motivation, real leadership ability, a willingness to work hard and get the job done. I mean, they're going to get a lot of opportunities. If you ask me, I would say there's probably more bias on the upper end where we, you know, mistakenly, you know, and I'm talking about my age group now, assume people in this age group, you know, just, you know, aren't necessarily interested in moving or doing different things. And I think, you know, the way to approach that is it really is on person to be incumbent on the person to go and say, hey, I really want to work another 8 years or 10 years or whatever it is, and I still want to do these things, and make your intention known, because people, all of us make different assumptions about people. And, you know, and it was the same for women, by the way, where it used to be, oh, women won't want to travel. They won't want to live overseas. They won't want to do this. They won't want to do that because they have children. Well, as a woman who's lived in 3 countries outside of the US, dragging my children with me, I can tell you that's a wrong assumption for all women. Right. So, you know, setting up those very, you know, I ask my older employees, how long do you intend to work? That might be illegal, I'm not sure, but I do ask them, like, how long do you intend to work and what do you want to do in your remaining years? Because some will tell me, hey, I would love this job, I would love to retire out of this job, and others will be like, no, there's still things I want to do. So it's having those very open conversations by both the employer and if the employer doesn't initiate them, by the employee volunteering up that information.
Thank you. So I'm going to make a point that Deb Gruby, who is our president now, she made a point, and she was in industry for a long time as a leader. She wrote, approach execs by being short and succinct and direct on your points. I think going to what Gary was saying about bringing things to the table, and never bring more than 2 points to any argument. Pick the most powerful points to make. So the next question, Jennifer, I'm going to ask you this one. Role modeling is a very important factor in career goals selection for many individuals. For instance, many women choose elementary education careers because these careers were modeled for them from a young age. How could I, as a white man, help students find their role models to encourage them in STEM?
Ooh, I like that question. So how, as a white man, encourage women to go into STEM, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, like, look for the successful role models out there. I mean, we're more than happy to mentor and encourage people to get them. There's a huge gap, especially in STEM, when it comes to diverse talent and Latinos. So I will say, again, I get called all the time from male allies, so I can talk to their daughters who are in high school or like thinking about different ones. So I would say that's a really easy way to go about it. Okay. LinkedIn is a powerful tool, guys. So go and reach out to LinkedIn, and hopefully you'll get a response and connection that way. That's how people reach out to me.
Okay, and then this is one. What strategies can be used to deal with microaggressive comments in meetings in a constructive way? confronting them at the moment so everyone there learns, or one-on-one afterward? Which way to do that? First of all, you got to know what microaggression is. Also, I'm sure it's a term people use a lot now. So I like to liken it to, like, if there's a balloon and you keep like tapping away at the balloon, and then all of a sudden the balloon pops, because it's just micro. It's not like, oh, they slapped me, but it's like, no, they were just poking me in the back. It's just. But can anybody speak to microaggressions and how to deal with that in a public meeting? Somebody is kind of.
Yeah, I can give an example that happened to me 3 times. Each time that in my last 3 jobs, I was the first African-American. So I was the first African-American school chair in electrical and computer engineering. I was the first African-American dean of engineering. I am now the first African-American chancellor, my current role. Each of those organizations has a professional society. So there's a group of electrical engineering department heads, there's a national dean's group, and then there's the various, chancellor president groups. At my first meeting of each of those groups, when I was being introduced, I'll just pick the first one, Department Heads Association. Everyone's introducing themselves. I'm Gary May from Georgia Tech, whatever. And someone will ask me, what do you do at Georgia Tech? Or what do you do at UC Davis? What is your role? It's a meeting of deans or department heads, or in the last case, chancellors and presidents. That's a microaggression, right? Everyone else there is a dean. So why would you think I'm not, right? And so how do you handle it? I think you face it head on. You just, make the statement I just made to that person who inquires, like, why would you think I'm any different from anyone else at this meeting?
You do that in the public? You do that in the.
No, I would do it one-on-one. I wouldn't try to.
One-on-one. Right.
I would take them aside. But microaggressions happen at every level, including this level, right?
That's why mentors are so important, because mentors can give you what you might expect. They can also give you the talking points, right? You practice them in the mirror, so that you say it with a straight face, or however you. But you mentors and coaches can help you with those things. Okay, a couple more questions. It would be wonderful if Celanese and other companies can share some best practices and respectful workplace training with the AICHE Academy. I'm going to leave that out there as a point that we can follow up on, okay? What have your companies and universities done to address the gaps that are widening as a function of the COVID-19 pandemic, especially for employees with young children and or elder care? Wow. I know I'm working from home, but I mean, it's deeper than that, right? So, women are having more childcare responsibilities, and so it impacts them differently. Folks from certain types of schools where they may not have had the financial aid, and, so what are you all doing to help your employees so that whatever this gap is doesn't get wider?
Well, we've had if you can work from home, you should work from home rule in place since last March. It continues now. We have pretty extensive, for people that do have to appear in person, we have, masking and distancing and all the things you need to do, sanitization procedures. We have a pretty extensive, what we call campus ready roadmap and handbook. We have testing available to our students, our faculty, and our staff on campus, COVID testing, which we've been able to do it for free. And we're trying to broaden that to the broader Davis community now. So we're just trying to help everyone get through what is a very difficult situation for us all.
Yeah, I've seen from an HR perspective that we have also expanded benefits in terms of like the care for the kids or elderly, or additional days for yourself, not only sick days, but like mental days, to get making sure that you can take care of yourself, well-being, and your mental health. So those are really good practices that I've seen. I've seen also blocking hours, so very core, making sure that we don't dial in meetings. So we have very respectful core working hours. So I've seen some of that, and launch and learns to understand what it is to be, for example, not me, but like if I'm a person by myself doing COVID by myself for months and months, that sense of isolation, what does that mean to be caring for your kids and at the same time your older parents? So a lot of education happening right now.
So again, we don't have a lot of time left. Let me ask you a question. Any books or resources that students or industry professionals to consult on for developing leadership skills? Is there a book? What are you all reading now?
There's way too many books on this topic.
Oh, yeah.
Some of them are even good.
Right.
I was looking because I have a book, and I don't want to butcher the name, but it's for Latinos in leadership. So that's something I'm passionate about. And I think it's Auténtico, but maybe I took a picture of it. So if not, ask me in LinkedIn.
Yeah. There was another question. Somebody said the age bias question fits in with issues concerning retention and re-entry. This is often an issue for women, but can also be for a person with a history of a disability. How can this be addressed both within a system and with assumptions about people? So let me rephrase that. I think the person is asking about this bias towards a person with a history of a disability. How can you address this within the system, and whatever assumptions people may or may not have about a person with a history of a disability? I'm hoping I got your question right.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure about the question. I think, look, it's a difficult one. Most companies want to hire people with disabilities, who still have the capability to do the work. Obviously, there's some work in plant environments that make that difficult from a safety standpoint. But assuming this is about an office environment, again, we all have biases. We all make assumptions. I think someone with a disability is going to have to be really upfront at the beginning about and the case to sell, which is, this is what I bring. Because people will very quickly learn to forget about what you don't bring. If you can help people focus on, this is what I bring. And we have a number of people, with disabilities in our workforce, and they do great. But there is, I hate to admit, there's a burden on them at the beginning to tell people, this is what I bring. Especially if it's very visible disability, because it's hard for people, people want to understand, but they need help understanding. So you have to have the conversation.
So somebody mentioned that work from home options are great, but how do you specifically address the gap in productivity? It's incredibly depressing to see yourself falling behind your peers while caring for virtual learners at home. We're not going to address that question here, but that is something that is key to my heart right now. So I'm saying that at AIChE, well, I guess I can say we will deal with that more, because I think COVID, once we go back to work, there's still going to be remnants. I'm sorry, we've been working. Once we go back to our traditional work environments, there are going to be remnants of COVID that are going to have impact on a lot of people. And so I think that this is a longer conversation, but I really appreciate your thoughts. And can I do one more question? Isabel's still there? Somebody asked a question about diverse populations that are discouraged from starting. Could you send that question to me directly or to us directly? Because I think we can engage the panel in answering that question about the pipeline and recruiting and classes and things. Let me give you one last question. Can you give advice for mentors on how to approach employees to offer help if you think your mentor employee could use an ally, and how you could help? I had a mentor help me as an ally by enforcing pronoun changes. I would not have known to approach that mentor or any for help. So I wrote a book chapter in a book called Success Strategies for Women in STEM on mentoring. And there are different types of mentors, right? There are mentee seeking and mentor seeking, right? So if you are a mentee seeking, you're trying to find somebody, or you have someone that you want to mentor, how do you approach them in a way that doesn't kind of insult them, to offer to be an ally? Gary.
Well, I have another appointment. I'm sorry.
Oh, Gary.
We're over time now, so I'm
Okay.
late for the next appointment.
Okay. Thank you so much, Gary and Lori and Jennifer, for participating in this panel. So many great questions. And Gary, thank you for gracing us with your electrical engineering presence. And you fit right in. You were great.
Nice to meet everyone. Enjoyed it very much. I'm going to tell my daughters I had a panel with J-Lo tonight.
She gets that all the time, she says. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So I don't know if you all want to answer that last question or we'll just end here. Isabel, give me some feedback. We should probably end.
Yes, I believe we're right on time. I think that all participants received a lot from this.
Yes.
I think this was an excellent panel, and I thank you all so much for having this very open and incredibly open discussion. That's really the best way that I can say it. It was a very true discussion. I'm very thankful.
Thank you. And if we didn't get to your question, send it to, I don't know who, but send it to somebody associated with AICHE. We'll try to get an answer for you. So thank you so much. Thank you, Isabel.
Thank you.
Jennifer.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Gracias.